In this video, we'll talk about how you can deploy ComfyUI or any other kind of system in a serverless environment on Runpod. So let's take it step by step. Firstly, what exactly is serverless? From the name itself, it can be pretty confusing. You might think there are no servers involved, but that is untrue. Servers are still involved. You have your GPU, CPU, memory, storage, and all these things, but you don't have to manage it. So when you don't have to manage the infrastructure, it's called serverless. Second thing is, what exactly are workers and what is cold start? So let's just look at some examples. I'm in serverless option here in Runpod. I'm just going to select a random thing. I'll just select image and then I'll select SD automatic. All right, I'll just say configure. So now if I'm trying to configure this, the first thing you see is that I get these options for the memory limit. This is the GPU memory, and this is the exact charging that I'm going to pay per second to run it. Now let's look at these two words, workers and cold start, and let's see how the pricing works. So a worker is simply an environment which runs whatever image or any other thing you want to run. And that is a single worker. So you can have these many workers, and when you hit this worker with an API request, they can process and send back the data to you. So the basis of this architecture is something like this. You have this setup, which is not on 24/7. So when you send a request, this spins up. Basically, it's sleeping and then it just wakes up and does the processing and sends back the information to you. And then you send this instance back into the sleep mode. That is the basic idea of what we're trying to do. So now if you think about it, cold start feeds into this. So if you just have one instance running and it's been sleeping for about 5 hours and you send the first request won't only need the time to complete the exact request you're asking for, it's also going to need time to wake up. That's where cold starts come in. So you can also have an active worker when defining what exactly to do in one pod. For example, if you click on manage and click on edit endpoint, you will see that you have the max workers, so you can define how many instances you need. You can also have an active worker started all the time. So suppose you have 3 of these little computers, so this is going to be turned on 24/7. So whenever some random request comes in from you, it's just there to listen to it, process, and send it back. Suppose you send in more requests, then it turns these on. But the first request isn't slow because this is already on. And then it gives the commands to these that you need to wake up because we're going to get more requests. Then you can also define the GPU count. So this is the exact timeout after which it goes to sleep. So now we're done with part one. Let's talk about part two on how you can make these endpoints. So the first option that you have already seen right now, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to copy this and paste it here to delete the endpoint. So now if you click on create new endpoint, you see you have some preset models for text, embedding, audio, image. But you also have these two custom sources. One is Docker image and the other is GitHub repository. And these two options might look different on the surface, but underneath they're the same. So the idea is this. You have this Docker file, which contains the information about what exactly do you want to give to the system. What exactly should the configuration be? And then from this information, you bake this into an image and you build your Docker image. Then you have this image ready. And then you feed this image to your system. And then your system gets ready. So if you see here, you can see either you can give it the Docker image, which contains the Docker file or any other kind of information how you're going to run. So now you can see it's either asking you to give this or this. Right, so if you're building custom images, you can just give it this option, which is the Docker file using GitHub. Or if you're using a pre-built image, you can just use this. Now let's talk about the third part. And after this, we're going to see how you can deploy one of these endpoints. So the third part is about custom images. Suppose you want to have some custom setup. You're not satisfied with all the options you have at the baseline. So when you build these custom images, so the custom images are generally in the GitHub repository. So if you click on this first link and then head to the exact Runpod workers repository, you will see that there are many workers and their images. So the worker is basically the Docker file. This is the image. So if you look closely into this worker here in Stable Diffusion Excel, you will see that you have this repository. And there are two main things which are mandatory, which is Dockerfile and the handler.py. So the Docker file contains the information about the system as I told you here. So this is the same. And the handler.py contains the information about API handling. Suppose you send a request and then whatever it does, it talks to the Docker file in the actual system and then it sends you the image and then it returns you the image via API. So that is done by handler.py. So if you build a custom image, you have to get these two files. Even if you look at the worker template, the workers in this collection follow the worker template, which includes some basic CI/CD functionality. This template can be used to make custom workers. So if you open this repository in a new folder, you should be able to see the most important files, which is Dockerfile and the handler.py. So if you want to build a custom image, you would have to define everything you want here. So let's compare this to the worker SDXL to the baseline Dockerfile. So if you look at this file, you see that you're just getting a base CUDA version from Runpod, and then you're installing Python, installing some dependencies, adding file, and then turning the handler on. And now if you see in this file, you see that you get a similar kind of runtime. You install all these extra packages, and you have the CUDA version and all these things here. But in the handler is responsible for loading the models, as you can see. And if you see the handler here, they should be pretty empty. If your handler runs inference on a model, load the model here. So that is how you build custom images. And I'm going to add videos later inside the community on how you can build custom images. So this process of building custom images is pretty technical. So either you can use ChatGPT if you don't have experience building Docker files. So for this example, what I'll do is actually I'll use the SDXL model, and then I'll also talk to it from any 10, which means you can talk to it with any kind of API service. So let's get onto it. The first thing I'll do is open this repository. And if you look here, I'm going to use this Runpod API SDXL. And there's one more thing to remember. Each of these models have different kind of schema in the handler. And that depends on exactly how the person coded it. So if you see here, you get no information. If you go to some other link, for example, if you go to this example image that I attached here, you get the image, you get all the examples, and it also tells you what kind of argument or JSON request body it accepts. So it means the input, you have to feed the workflow here, and this is not mandatory, as you can see. The images are not required. The workflow and the base input is required. So let's go ahead and add this API SDXL. I'm going to copy this command from here and then head back to Runpod and choose the Docker image, paste this here, and remove these Docker pull command, these two words from in front of it. So I just have Runpod and the exact version. Then I'm going to select any amount of GPU memory. It's just built per second, so it's not going to be much of a hassle. I'm going to create the endpoint and wait for it to complete the build. If you're building it the first time, it might take a bit longer, but if the model is cached in, it should not take that long. And you can also see the workers initialize here. You can see our instance has started downloading the models. So I'm going to be back at it after a few minutes when it's done. So after about 5 to 7 minutes, the first worker at least was up, and then all of these are getting ready. So even when one of the workers is up, you can get started and start sending in requests. So let's look at all the things you need. Firstly, you need this URL. So you can just copy this from here and take it to N8N. So I have this set up here for you, but I'll just make another one just to show you how it goes. So I'll get the HTTP request node, and then I'll paste this here. So generally, this part is the same for everyone, but this is your exact endpoint. If you see here, when you come to overview, this is your endpoint. Once this is ready, you have two options after this, either run or run sync. If you do run, it's going to send the request and send you the ID back. But if you do run sync, it's just going to run the request and send the entire data back. If you're generating images, I would suggest you do run sync. If you're generating a long-standing task, do run only. So let me just give you an example of both. So this is the URL configured. It has to be a post request. Then for authentication, you have to configure a header auth. But just to keep it straightforward, I'll define it here. I'll say authorization. And then for the value, I'll get the value from here. This is the value, which is bearer, and then your API token. And how you can get the API token is by going to settings. And on this page, you should see an option for API keys. You can generate one from here. So once you have the API key, you have everything ready except the body. So you'll have to send a JSON. So now this is where the tricky part comes in. So every image, for example, API SDXL, or for example, FluxStep, all of these have different handler.py. So depending on the image you're using, or you make your custom image, the request is going to differ. So what you have to do to make it all easier for you is actually copy this code from here and then take it to GPT, which I just did. And at the end, I just ask it something like, how should I send body? Like, this is unclear, but it gets the point what I'm trying to ask it. So it just gives me the answer. It tells me that according to this code, which is going to handle my incoming request, it is accepting something like this. It accepts an input and then prompt, negative prompt, and all these things. So what I'll do is just paste this here. And now if I run this, that I should get an event back, and there you go. So I have this in queue, and then I can fetch it back using the same ID. What I'll do is copy and paste this node again, and then open this, turn it to get, and then I think this has to be status followed by the ID. I'll just add the ID at the end. And now I think there's an extra gap, which I would have to reduce. After the gap is reduced, what I'll do is we need the authorization, but we don't need to send anybody. Now, if I fetch this information, this should give me the data. Perfect. So now there you go. You get the image. So either you can do this or directly run the run sync, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So let's look at the other way. What I'll do is, this is the previous setup that I was running. Let's see the exact. I'll copy this endpoint, and hopefully this is correct. Okay, this is already configured. So this is the other way of doing it, where we use run sync. So if I do run sync, it is going to give me the entire data in a single node. I don't have to first send the request, then fetch it back. And now you can see I get the entire data back. But there is a catch when you get the data, which I'm going to show you. If you do show data here, and if you see it closely, you get this base64 image, but it is prefixed by data, image, PNG, and all these things, which you can observe clearly from here. Data, image, / PNG, base64. So we need to remove that base64 and this front part so we can use the actual image expression. So that's why I have added that information to this edit field. Then I get the actual information here. Then I can run the code, which gives me only the data, which I can convert back to the file and use it. So now I'm going to convert it back to file, and then there you go. I have the actual image for a futuristic city. Even if I use some other prompt, I'll just say, once I get it, I can just run the entire pipeline just by clicking this button. And there you go. I have the image. There is a robotic lion. So that is how you use custom serverless APIs, and you only pay for what you use. And if you want custom images, I'm going to make them later. Currently, I'm not going to do it because it's extremely time intensive, and there is no actual end in sight. Like, it's a lot of back and forth before you figure it out. So that's going to be all for this video. I'm going to see you in the next one.